The Grand Galactic Assembly floated in the darkness of space like a jewel made of light and metal. Inside its massive halls, thousands of beings from hundreds of different worlds gathered to witness what they believed would be a simple decision. The air hummed with translated voices as creatures of every imaginable shape discussed the matter at hand. Some had scales, others had fur, and many had forms that defied easy description. They all agreed on one thing, though. Humanity had to be stopped. Chancellor Vexter stood at the central podium, his reptilian form towering over the speaker's platform. His red eyes scanned the assembly as his voice boomed through the translation systems. The humans had been found 3 cycles ago when one of their primitive exploration vessels stumbled into Galactic Council space. At first, the Council treated them with the usual curiosity reserved for newly discovered species. They sent diplomats and scientists to study Earth and its inhabitants. What they found disturbed them deeply. Earth was classified as a death world within the first week of observation. The gravity alone would crush most civilized species. The atmosphere had apparently tried to kill everything living on it at least 5 times in the planet's history. Diseases swept through populations regularly. Predators hunted in packs. The weather itself could destroy entire cities. Yet humans not only survived there, but thrived. They built cities, developed technology, and eventually reached for the stars. This terrified the Council more than any weapon ever could. Vexter explained to the Assembly that humanity represented an unprecedented threat. They bred quickly, adapted faster, and showed a disturbing willingness to use violence when threatened. Several council members had reviewed human history files. The wars they fought among themselves produced death counts that made seasoned military commanders feel sick. They had nearly destroyed their own planet multiple times with weapons designed to split atoms and poison the land for generations. These were not beings who understood civilized behavior. These were survivors from a nightmare world, and they were now capable of traveling between stars. The vote took less than an hour. Out of 347 species represented in the Council, 312 voted for immediate military action. 20 voted for continued observation. 15 abstained. Humanity would be given one final chance to surrender completely and accept relocation to a controlled reservation world. If they refused, the Galactic Council would end the human threat permanently. The decision was final, and the Assembly cheered. They believed they were protecting the galaxy from monsters not far away from the Assembly. Commander Hyen stood on the bridge of the Terran Defense Fleet flagship. He was a tall man with tired eyes and short dark hair that had started graying at the temples despite his relatively young age. The message from the Galactic Council played on the main screen for the 3rd time. His crew watched in silence as the alien chancellor delivered humanity's death sentence with the casual tone of someone ordering lunch. Hyen felt his jaw tighten, but forced himself to remain calm. His crew needed to see strength right now, not fear. Beside him, Tactical Officer Minji studied the data streaming across her console. She was younger than Hyen by a decade, brilliant with numbers and strategy, and currently working through calculations that made her frown deeper with each passing second. She finally looked up and met her commander's eyes. The numbers were not good. Earth had 12 warships capable of deep space combat. The Galactic Council had thousands. Humanity's fastest ships could barely match their slowest cargo vessels. Their weapons technology lagged behind by at least a century. In every measurable category, this was not a war. It was an execution. Hyen asked her for options anyway. Minji pulled up a tactical display showing Earth's solar system. She outlined 3 possible strategies, each one more desperate than the last. They could try to fight in open space and die quickly. They could retreat to Earth orbit and die while defending their home. Or they could scatter the fleet and try to survive as long as possible while hoping for a miracle. None of the options ended with human victory. None of them even ended with human survival. But Minji's voice remained steady as she presented them, because that was what soldiers did. They fought even when the math said fighting was pointless. The council had assigned their best military commander to lead the human extermination. General Krixna of the Velkari Empire had conquered 17 worlds and put down 32 rebellions without ever losing a major engagement. His species evolved on a peaceful world with gentle weather and abundant food. They learned warfare from necessity when they reached space and found others who would threaten their paradise. Krixna had studied conflict for 200 years and mastered it completely. He accepted the assignment to destroy humanity with confidence. He had never encountered an enemy his fleet could not break. The general's flagship was a massive vessel called the Harmonious Victory, which now led an armada of 3,000 warships toward Earth. In his ready room, Krixna reviewed the intelligence reports on humanity with his second-in-command. Lieutenant Jiwan was a younger Velkari officer with a sharp mind and careful attention to detail. She found the human data fascinating in a disturbing way. The files showed species that lived an average of 80 years, but spent huge portions of their history killing each other. They created art and music of stunning beauty, then turned around and invented weapons to destroy everything they built. They were contradictions wrapped in flesh, and Jiwan could not predict how they would respond to overwhelming force. Krixna dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. He had fought unpredictable enemies before. Desperation made creatures do strange things, but it never changed the mathematics of war. His fleet outnumbered the humans 300 to 1. His ships were faster and better armed. His troops were trained and experienced. The humans were isolated in their single-star system, with nowhere to run and no allies to call. This would be finished in days, perhaps hours. He would offer them the chance to surrender one final time, as the council required, and when they refused as he expected, he would remove them from existence as efficiently as possible. There was no honor in this task, but it was necessary. The galaxy needed to be protected from Death-World savagery. On Earth, billions of humans watched the skies and waited. They had sent every diplomatic message they could think of. They had offered peace, trade, cultural exchange, and anything else that might prevent war. The council ignored them all. Now families gathered together in homes and shelters. Parents held children and tried to explain what was coming. Scientists worked frantically on weapons that might close the technology gap. Soldiers said goodbye to loved ones and reported to their posts. Everyone knew what was coming. The galaxy had decided humanity was too dangerous to exist, and there was no court of appeals, no higher authority to petition, no escape from the judgment. All they could do was stand together and face the darkness approaching from the stars. They were children of Earth, born from a world that tried to kill them every single day of their evolution. If the galaxy wanted them dead, it would have to work for it. General Krixna watched the tactical display with calm satisfaction as his forward scout fleet approached the human defensive perimeter. 300 ships moved in perfect formation through the darkness near Jupiter's orbit. The massive gas giant swirled in the background, completely indifferent to the violence about to unfold in its shadow. Krixna had deployed this many vessels, not because he needed them, but because the council wanted this finished quickly. Overwhelming force would break human morale before the real battle even began. At least, that was what every military doctrine he had ever studied suggested would happen. The 12 human warships waited in a loose formation that looked almost casual to Velkari eyes. They were crude things compared to Galactic Council vessels, built from steel and determination rather than elegant design. Their hulls showed wear from years of service. Their weapon systems were primitive, but they did not run. They did not broadcast surrender messages. They simply waited as 300 superior ships moved to destroy them. Crixna found their stubbornness foolish, but almost admirable in a sad way. They were about to die for nothing, but they would die with courage. He could respect that much, at least. Commander Hyen stood on the bridge of his flagship and felt the weight of humanity's survival pressing down on his shoulders. Every person on Earth watched this moment through broadcast feeds. Every human in the solar system knew that if these 12 ships fell quickly, hope would die with them. Minji counted down the range as the alien fleet approached. Her voice stayed steady, even though her hands trembled slightly on her console. Around the bridge, crew members checked their stations one final time. Some prayed. Others stared straight ahead with expressions carved from stone. All of them understood they were probably living their last minutes. Hyen gave the order to engage when the enemy fleet reached optimal firing range. What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for generations, though nobody in that moment realized they were witnessing the birth of a legend. The 12 human ships did not adopt defensive positions. They did not attempt to use Jupiter's gravity well for cover. They did not try to retreat toward reinforcements. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the center of the alien formation at maximum burn. The tactic was so unexpected that Crixna actually stood up from his command chair in surprise. The human vessels crashed into the Valkyrie lines like hammers into glass. Their weapons fired continuously, not with the careful precision of experienced military forces, but with desperate aggression. They targeted engines and weapon systems, trying to disable as many enemy ships as possible rather than destroy them outright. Captain Doyon commanded the TDFS Indomitable, a heavy cruiser that had seen better days. His ship took concentrated fire from a dozen enemy vessels within the first 30 seconds. Alarms screamed across his bridge. Hull breaches opened to vacuum. His weapons officer died when a plasma blast melted through the forward section. Doyon watched his ship die around him and made a choice that defined everything that came after. He aimed the Indomitable directly at a Valkyrie carrier and pushed his engines past their safety limits. His remaining crew shouted warnings, but he ignored them. The carrier tried to turn away, but ships that large could not maneuver quickly. Doyon's cruiser struck it amidships at a speed that turned metal into liquid fire. The explosion destroyed both vessels instantly and sent debris tearing through a dozen nearby ships. The Valkyrie formation scattered in panic, their careful coordination shattered by an attack they could not comprehend. Who intentionally destroyed their own ship? What kind of species chose death over retreat? The battle lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, 8 human ships were destroyed or crippled beyond repair. The remaining 4 retreated toward Mars, with their hulls bleeding atmosphere and their crews working frantically to keep basic systems online. But the human fleet had accomplished something impossible. Over 100 Valkyrie warships were completely destroyed. 200 more were damaged badly enough that they had to withdraw for repairs. The 300 ship strike force that was supposed to crush humanity in an afternoon had been cut nearly in half by 12 primitive vessels crewed by beings who fought like cornered predators. Crixna sat in his command chair and stared at the casualty reports in silence. Around him, his bridge crew worked with stunned efficiency to coordinate rescue operations and regroup the scattered fleet. Lieutenant Jiwan approached carefully and stood at attention until he acknowledged her. When he finally looked up, she presented her preliminary analysis of the engagement. The humans had not fought like any species in Council records. They showed no interest in self-preservation. They treated their own lives as acceptable losses if trading them damaged the enemy. Every military doctrine Jiwan had studied said that intelligent beings avoided death when possible. The humans seemed to view death as just another tactical option. The general ordered his fleet to hold position while he reviewed everything they knew about Earth. G1 had compiled reports from the initial surveys, and they painted a picture that disturbed Crixina more with each page. Earth's gravity was 1.9 times standard. Most council species could not even stand upright on that world. The atmospheric pressure would crush their lungs. The temperature swings between seasons would kill them. The planet had suffered 5 mass extinction events in its geological history. Volcanic eruptions that darkened the sky for years. Ice ages that covered continents. Asteroid impacts that boiled the oceans. Yet life continued there. Not just survived, but evolved into increasingly complex and dangerous forms. Humans were apex predators on a world full of apex predators. They hunted animals that could kill them easily if given the chance. They built civilizations in places where the weather itself tried to destroy them. They fought diseases that killed millions until they learned to create medicine. They went to war with each other repeatedly, developing more efficient ways to kill their own species with each conflict. Earth had tried to eliminate humanity for millions of years and failed. Instead, it forged them into something the galaxy had never encountered. Beings who saw struggle as normal. Beings who accepted loss as the price of survival. Beings who would run toward danger instead of away from it, because running toward problems was how you solved them on a death world. Crixina stood and walked to the main viewport. He stared at the distant sun that warmed Earth and tried to imagine what it felt like to evolve there. His own world was paradise. Gentle rain, abundant food. Predators were small and easily avoided. The Valkyrie learned cooperation because life was easy enough and working together brought prosperity. They developed culture and art and eventually technology. When they reached the stars and found that other species could threaten them, they learned warfare reluctantly. But it was always something foreign to their nature, a skill adopted out of necessity rather than instinct. Humans were different. They were born into violence. They learned as children that the world could kill them and that survival meant fighting back. Every aspect of their evolution selected for traits that helped them endure suffering. Physical resilience, mental toughness, social cooperation, born from shared struggle rather than shared prosperity. The willingness to sacrifice for the group, because on a death world, the group was all that stood between you and extinction. They were not cruel or evil. They were adapted. Perfectly, terribly adapted to conditions that would destroy any other known species. The general realized something in that moment that changed his understanding of the war. The Galactic Council was not afraid of human aggression. They were afraid of human competence. They were afraid that if other species learned a death world could produce intelligence, someone might wonder what else was possible. They were afraid that humanity represented a different path to the stars, not through peaceful evolution on gentle worlds, but through surviving hell and coming out stronger. The Council wanted humans dead, not because of what they had done, but because of what they represented. The possibility that paradise was not required for civilization. The proof that suffering could forge greatness instead of destroying it. Crixina returned to his command chair and began composing his report to the Council. He would tell them about the battle. He would tell them about the casualties. But he would not tell them about his doubts. Not yet. He needed to understand these humans better before he decided what came next. He ordered G1 to compile every piece of information available about human history and culture. He wanted to know everything about the species he was supposed to destroy, because for the first time in 200 years of military service, General Crixina was not certain that victory was the same thing as being right. General Crixina made a decision that his senior officers questioned, but could not refuse. He would test human resolve on the ground rather than continue the space battle. New Bizin was a colony world that humans had settled only 20 years ago. It orbited a yellow star 3 light years from Earth and held a population of 12,000 civilians. plus 300 stationed Marines. The gravity was only slightly lower than Earth standard, which meant it would be crushing for Velkari troops, but Krixna needed to see how humans fought when defending their homes. He needed to understand what he was truly facing. The assault force consisted of 50,000 elite Velkari shock troops. They were the best soldiers his empire could produce, trained for decades in combat tactics and equipped with weapons technology far superior to anything humans possessed. The invasion fleet arrived in orbit around New Bizin at dawn local time. Krixna broadcast a demand for surrender. The colony's governor, a woman named Yunji, responded within minutes. Her message was simple and delivered with calm certainty. The people of New Bizin would not surrender. They would not abandon their homes. If the Velkari wanted the colony, they would have to take it by force. Sergeant Bowman commanded the Marine garrison. Stationed at New Bizin, he was a stocky man with a scarred face and eyes that had seen too much combat already in his 30 years of life. When the invasion warning came through, he gathered his 300 Marines and began organizing the civilian population. There was no panic, no chaos. Every colonist knew this possibility existed when they chose to settle a world beyond Earth's protection. They had drills for this. They had plans. More importantly, they had the same stubborn determination that brought them across the stars to build new homes in the first place. The Velkari dropships descended through the atmosphere like a metal rain. They landed in fields around the colony's main settlement and began deploying troops in textbook military formations. Krixna watched from orbit through drone feeds and felt satisfied with the initial deployment. His forces outnumbered the defenders more than 100 to 1. The colony could not possibly hold against this assault. He expected surrender within hours. Once the humans realized their situation was hopeless. What actually happened shocked every military observer watching from the Velkari fleet. The humans did not mass their forces for a defensive stand. They did not attempt to evacuate civilians to safety. Instead, Bowman scattered his Marines throughout the colony in small teams and armed every civilian capable of holding a weapon. The colonists turned their settlement into a maze of death. They barricaded streets with construction equipment. They planted improvised explosives in buildings. They prepared ambush positions in homes and shops and warehouses. When the Velkari troops advanced, expecting organized resistance, they walked into a nightmare. The battle for New Bizin became a brutal close quarters fight that negated every technological advantage the Velkari possessed. Their advanced weapons were designed for open warfare between organized military units. In the tight confines of colony streets and buildings, those advantages disappeared. A Velkari soldier with a plasma rifle was just as vulnerable to a human with a steel pipe as he was to a Marine with a proper weapon. The heavy gravity that felt normal to humans exhausted Velkari troops within hours. They struggled to move in armor designed for lighter worlds. They gasped for breath in air that felt thick as water to their lungs. Bowman led his Marines from one firefight to the next, never staying in position long enough for the enemy to concentrate fire. His teams would ambush Velkari units, inflict casualties, then fade back into the colony before reinforcements could arrive. The civilians fought alongside them with whatever weapons they could find. A farmer named Yoon killed 3 Velkari soldiers with a plasma cutter meant for clearing fields. A teacher named Hana used her knowledge of the colony's ventilation system to lead a Velkari squad into a dead end where Marines were waiting. The colonists were not trained soldiers, but they knew their home better than any invader could. And they understood that surrender meant relocation to some distant prison world where they would never see their families again. On the second day of fighting, Krixna increased the assault force to 70,000 troops. He authorized the use of heavy weapons despite the risk to civilian structures. Velkari artillery began shelling suspected human positions. Buildings collapsed. Fires spread through entire districts. The colony was being destroyed, but still the humans did not surrender. They moved through the rubble like ghosts, attacking from unexpected angles and disappearing before his troops could respond effectively. His casualties climbed past 10,000, then 15,000. The numbers made no sense. His forces had every advantage except familiarity with the terrain. Yet they were losing soldiers at a rate that suggested near parity in combat effectiveness. Lieutenant Jiwan reviewed combat footage in the command center and felt growing horror at what she witnessed. The humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to make victory so costly that the price became unbearable. She watched a recording of a young human woman, barely out of adolescence, charging a Velkari position with nothing but a knife. The woman died instantly, but her action distracted the soldiers long enough for a Marine to destroy their position with a grenade. She watched a human father shield his children while a building collapsed around them, his body taking the impact so they might survive. She watched wounded humans drag themselves toward enemy positions with explosives clutched in their hands, choosing to die if it meant taking invaders with them. The most disturbing footage came from the colony's fusion reactor. A civilian engineer named Sora had stayed behind when the reactor district was evacuated. She sealed herself inside the control room and sent a final message to the colony network. Ji-won played the recording for Krixna. Sora spoke in Korean, but the translation was clear enough. She apologized. She said she knew Velkari soldiers were just following orders. She said she knew many of them had families waiting for them to come home. Then she explained that she was going to overload the reactor and destroy everyone in a 2-kilometer radius. She gave the Velkari troops 30 minutes to evacuate. She hoped they would use that time to leave because she did not want to kill them, but she could not let them take the reactor intact. If they stayed, she would detonate it anyway. Some Velkari commanders ordered their troops to stone the reactor and stop her. Those soldiers died when Sora triggered the overload early. The explosion vaporized 3,000 Velkari troops and destroyed an entire district of the colony. It also eliminated any chance of the invaders securing New Bizan's power infrastructure. Krixna watched the mushroom cloud rise from the colony surface and felt something break inside his certainty. Sora had been a civilian, an engineer. She had no military training, yet she chose to become a weapon rather than see her home fall intact to invaders. What kind of species produced such individuals? What kind of world shaped people who viewed their own deaths as acceptable tools? On the third day, the Velkari troops broke. They had suffered over 30,000 casualties against an enemy that started with barely 3,000 defenders. The humans were all dead or dying. The colony was destroyed. But the Velkari soldiers could not endure the psychological horror of fighting an enemy that never retreated, never surrendered, and never stopped coming. They had been trained to fight armies, not populations willing to die to the last person. When General Krixna ordered his remaining forces to withdraw to the landing zones, some units ran. Others had to be carried by their fellows because they were too mentally shattered to function. The fleet recovered 20,000 combat-capable troops from the 70,000 deployed. Another 15,000 were wounded badly enough to require extensive medical treatment. The rest were dead, scattered across a colony that now resembled the surface of a death world more than a civilized settlement. Krixna looked at the casualty reports and knew he could not hide this from the council. He had deployed overwhelming force against a numerically inferior enemy and lost more soldiers than any Velkari general had lost in a century. The humans had been wiped out, but they had made the victory meaningless. New Bizan was rubble. There was nothing left to conquer. That night, Krixna began studying human history in earnest. Ji-Wan had compiled thousands of files covering millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of recorded civilization. He started with their wars, the conflicts they fought against each other before reaching the stars. What he found horrified him more than the battle for New Bizin. The humans had fought 2 global wars within a span of 30 years. They developed weapons that could poison continents. They created bombs that split atoms and leveled entire cities in seconds. They stood on the edge of total self-annihilation during something called the Cold War, where 2 human nations held the entire species hostage to mutual destruction, yet they survived. Not despite the violence, but through it somehow. Each conflict taught them new lessons. Each disaster made them more resilient. They developed international cooperation, not from peaceful instinct, but from learned necessity. They built their civilization on foundations of shared trauma rather than shared prosperity. Earth had made them this way. The death world that should have killed them instead forged them into beings who saw extinction-level events as challenges to overcome, rather than fates to accept. Krixna finally understood what the Galactic Council feared. Not human weapons, not human aggression. They feared human persistence. They feared a species that had looked at a hostile universe and decided to survive anyway through sheer stubborn will. They feared what it meant that such beings now had access to the stars. The general closed the history files and sat in darkness, considering what he had learned. He was supposed to destroy humanity to protect the galaxy. But who was really being protected? And from what? From a species that fought viciously when threatened, but also showed extraordinary compassion to their own? From people who built art and music while simultaneously preparing for the next disaster? From survivors of a death world who refused to let their origins define their limits? For the first time in his long military career, General Krixna questioned his orders. The humans were not monsters. They were simply different, shaped by conditions no other council species had endured. He did not know if that made them dangerous or valuable, but he knew the current war was based on fear rather than reason. And fear had never been a solid foundation for justice. General, Krixna did something no Valkyrie commander had done in 300 years of military history. He opened a direct communication channel to the enemy without authorization from the Galactic Council. The request went through diplomatic frequencies to Commander Hyan's flagship. It took 6 hours for the human commander to respond, and when he did, his face on the screen showed exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. Hyan had lost thousands of people under his command. He had watched colonies burn. He had sent young soldiers to die, knowing they had almost no chance of survival. But he still agreed to talk, because that was what leaders did even when talking seemed pointless. They spoke through translation software that turned Valkyrie sounds into human language, and vice versa. Krixna explained that this conversation was not official. The Council had refused his request for a formal ceasefire. He was risking his career, and possibly his life, by making contact. But he needed to understand something that no amount of tactical data could explain. Why did humans fight so hard for a war they could not win? Why did they choose death over surrender, when surrender would at least preserve their species? Every military doctrine he knew said that survival was the primary goal. Yet humans seemed to view survival as secondary to something else he could not identify. Hyan was quiet for a long moment before he answered. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone trying to explain something so fundamental that he barely knew where to start. He told Krixna that humans did not want war. They had never wanted it. But Earth had not given them a choice about learning to fight. Their planet attacked them constantly from the moment they evolved consciousness. Diseases killed millions before they developed medicine. Predators hunted them until they became better hunters. Weather destroyed their homes until they learned to build structures that could withstand anything nature threw at them. They did not choose to become warriors. They became warriors because anything that lived on Earth either learned to fight or died. The commander explained that humans understood survival better than any species in the galaxy precisely because survival was never guaranteed for them. They knew what it meant to face extinction, not as an abstract concept, but as a daily reality for millions of years. When supervolcanoes erupted and blackened the sky, humans survived by cooperating and sharing scarce resources. When ice ages froze continents, they survived by developing new technologies and migrating to harsh environments. When plagues swept through populations, they survived by caring for the sick, even when it meant risking infection themselves. Earth tried to kill humanity thousands of times, and every time they adapted and persisted. Hyen paused and looked directly at the camera. He said the Galactic Council saw humans as violent savages from a death world. That assessment was not entirely wrong, but it was incomplete. Yes, humans could be violent. Yes, they came from a nightmare planet. But the same conditions that made them fierce fighters also made them the most cooperative species they had ever encountered in their own history. Because on Earth, cooperation was not optional. Individuals died alone. Groups survived together. They learned to sacrifice for each other, not from moral philosophy, but from practical necessity. The person who shared food during a famine increased everyone's chance of survival, including their own. The soldier who died defending their community gave that community a chance to raise the next generation. The human commander pulled up historical files and shared them across the channel. Images of human cities devastated by natural disasters, with survivors working together to rebuild. Footage of human doctors traveling to dangerous places to treat the sick. Records of human scientists sharing discoveries freely, because advancing knowledge helped everyone. Hyen explained that humans were shaped by two competing pressures on Earth: the pressure to fight and the pressure to cooperate. They became excellent at both because both were required. Violence alone would destroy them. Cooperation alone would leave them vulnerable. So they learned to be fierce warriors who also valued compassion. Aggressive defenders who also created art and music. Survivors who understood that the only way to truly survive was to lift each other up. Crixna listened and felt his understanding of humanity shift fundamentally. He had studied their wars and seen only the destruction. He had not looked deeply at what came after the wars. The peace treaties, the international organizations, the efforts to prevent future conflicts. Humans fought viciously when threatened, but they also worked harder than any species he knew to avoid fighting in the first place. They had nearly destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons during the Cold War, and that terrifying experience taught them to build systems that prevented such disasters. They learned from their mistakes in ways that suggested intelligence and wisdom rather than simple savagery. The general asked Hyen a direct question. If humans were offered true peace, would they accept it? If the Galactic Council approached them with genuine cooperation instead of fear and hostility, would humans be willing to join the galactic community as partners rather than threats? Hyen's answer came without hesitation. Yes, humanity wanted nothing more than to be part of something larger than themselves. They had dreamed of meeting alien civilizations for thousands of years. They had imagined peaceful contact and cultural exchange. When they finally reached the stars and found the Galactic Council, they approached with open hands and offers of friendship. The Council responded with a declaration of extermination. Humans fought back, not because they loved war, but because they refused to die quietly. Crixna ended the communication and sat, alone in his quarters for hours afterward. He reviewed his own military career and saw it differently now. Every world he had conquered had been labeled a threat by the Council. Every species he had defeated had been described as dangerous or uncivilized. He had trusted those assessments because he was a soldier and soldiers followed orders. But what if some of those assessments had been wrong? What if some of those species had been destroyed not because they were threats, but because they were different? Because they did not fit the Council's vision of civilization? He accessed classified Council records using his command authority. What he found confirmed his growing suspicions and made him angry in a way he had never experienced before. The decision to destroy humanity had been made before any serious diplomatic contact. 3 Council members had manipulated the initial reports about Earth. They edited data to emphasize human violence while removing information about human cooperation. They falsified incidents to make humans appear aggressive when the actual encounters had been peaceful. They even manufactured evidence of human weapons programs that did not exist. The war was not about protecting the galaxy. It was about eliminating a species that terrified the Council for reasons that had nothing to do with actual danger. Lieutenant Jiwan helped him dig deeper into the conspiracy. She was young enough to still believe in justice and old enough to understand how power corrupted institutions. Together, they uncovered communications between the 3 Council members discussing their true motives. They wanted Earth's location kept secret from the rest of the galaxy. They feared that if other species learned about humanity, someone would start asking dangerous questions. If life could thrive on a death world like Earth, what did that mean about the Council's assumptions? If humans could develop civilization despite constant struggle, did that invalidate the idea that paradise worlds were necessary for advancement? The conspirators saw humanity as evidence that challenged their worldview, and rather than examine their beliefs, they chose to destroy the evidence. Crixna realized the full scope of what was happening. The Council had sent him to commit genocide not for legitimate security reasons, but to protect a lie. They had ordered him to kill billions of beings because those beings proved something the Council did not want proven. That paradise was not the only path to civilization. That struggle could forge greatness. That the galaxy was large enough for many different kinds of intelligence and many different paths to the stars. The 3 conspirators feared change more than they valued truth, and they were willing to sacrifice an entire species to preserve their comfortable understanding of reality. The general made his decision then. He would not continue this war. He would not be the weapon that destroyed humanity to protect a lie. But he also could not simply refuse orders without consequences. The Council would remove him from command and send another general to finish the job. He needed to expose the conspiracy in a way that made continuing the war impossible. He needed to show the entire galaxy what was really happening and why. He needed to give humanity and truth both a fighting chance. Crixna called his senior officers to a meeting and told them what he had discovered. Some were shocked. Others had suspected something was wrong, but lacked the authority to investigate. All of them faced a choice now. They could continue following orders and live as honored soldiers who committed genocide. Or they could stand with their general and risk everything to do what was right. The vote was not unanimous. 3 officers chose to follow Council orders regardless of the conspiracy. Crixna relieved them of duty and placed them in protective custody. The rest stood with him. They understood they might be ending their careers, or even their lives. But they also understood that some things mattered more than personal safety. Lieutenant Jiwan volunteered to help prepare the evidence for broadcast. She spent 3 days compiling every piece of information they had gathered. The falsified reports, the edited data, the communications between conspirators, the true history of human civilization, showing both their violence and their compassion in full context. The footage from New Bizon that showed not just the fighting, but the aftermath. Human survivors treating wounded Velkari soldiers. Children leaving water for enemy troops trapped in collapsed buildings. Sora's final message apologizing to the families of the soldiers she was about to kill. The complete picture of who humans really were, instead of the monster story the Council Had manufactured .General, Crixna reviewed the compilation one final time and knew it was good work. This would end his military career. It would likely bring charges of treason, but it would also expose the truth in a way that could not be suppressed or ignored. He authorized the broadcast and watched as G1 uploaded the complete data package to every Galactic Council communication channel simultaneously. Within minutes, billions of beings across hundreds of worlds would see what he had discovered. The conspiracy would be revealed. The lies would be exposed. And humanity would have a chance at the justice they deserved. The general sat back in his command chair and waited for the consequences of his choice. He felt no regret, only a strange sense of peace. For 200 years he had served the Galactic Council, believing he fought for civilization and order. Now he understood that true civilization required more than order. It required truth. It required the courage to face uncomfortable realities. And it required the wisdom to recognize that different did not mean dangerous. Humanity was not a threat to the galaxy. They were a gift. Proof that life found ways to thrive in any condition. Evidence that intelligence could emerge from struggle just as easily as from comfort. The Council feared them for showing that paradise was not required for greatness. But fear was a poor reason to commit genocide. The broadcast hit the Galactic Council networks like a bomb that destroyed certainties instead of buildings. Within the first hour, 3 billion beings across the galaxy watched General Crixna's compiled evidence. Within 6 hours, that number climbed to 40 billion. By the end of the first day, nearly every civilized species in Council space had seen at least portions of the material. The conspirators tried to shut down the broadcast, but G1 had routed it through too many systems. Blocking it completely would require shutting down the entire galactic communication network, and that was politically impossible. The truth was out and spreading faster than anyone could contain it. The evidence was organized carefully to tell a complete story. First came the falsified reports about humanity, shown side by side with the accurate data that had been edited or removed. Species that prided themselves on scientific integrity were horrified to see how thoroughly the information had been manipulated. Research institutions across the galaxy began conducting their own analyses of Earth and finding that the real data painted a far more complex picture than the simple monster story the Council had promoted. Yes, humans were capable of violence, but they were also capable of extraordinary cooperation, creativity, and compassion. They were survivors shaped by a harsh world into something unique, not savages that needed to be eliminated. Next came the communications between the 3 Council members who had orchestrated the conspiracy. Chancellor Vexter, Ambassador Quintal, and High Administrator Morvex had spent years planning humanity's destruction. Their private messages revealed the truth they had hidden from the galaxy. They were not afraid of human weapons. They were afraid of what human existence implied. If a death world could produce advanced civilization, then the Council's entire philosophy about development and progress was questionable. Paradise worlds were not the only environment that fostered intelligence. Struggle could produce greatness. That idea threatened everything the Council had built their authority upon. So they decided to destroy the evidence before too many species started asking uncomfortable questions. The footage from New Bizan came next, but not the combat recordings that Velkari soldiers had filed. Crixna included the aftermath. Scenes of human survivors emerging from rubble with their hands raised to help fallen enemies. A human doctor named Junho, who spent 3 days treating wounded Velkari soldiers despite having no obligation to do so. Children leaving offerings of food and water near positions where enemy troops were trapped, unable to rescue them but unwilling to let them die of thirst. Sora's final message played in full, her voice apologizing to people she was about to kill, explaining that she did not hate them but could not let them take her home intact. She hoped they would evacuate. She wished their families well. Then she destroyed herself and 3,000 soldiers because that was the only choice Earth had taught her to make. The compilation concluded with General Krigzina speaking directly to the galaxy. He appeared in his full military uniform, medals from 2 centuries of service displayed across his chest. He looked tired but determined. His statement was simple and powerful. He had served the Galactic Council faithfully his entire adult life. He had conquered 17 worlds and defeated 32 rebellions. He had always believed he fought for civilization and order. But this war against humanity had revealed something he could no longer ignore. The Council was capable of lying. The Council was capable of genocide based on fear rather than reason. And if the Council could do this to humanity, they could do it to any species that challenged their comfortable assumptions about reality. Krigzina did not call for revolution or violence. He simply asked every being watching to consider what they had seen and make their own judgment. Were humans a threat that required extinction? Or were they survivors who deserved a place in the galactic community? Was the Council an organization worth preserving in its current form? Or did it need fundamental reform to prevent future atrocities? He ended by accepting full responsibility for his actions. He knew he would face charges of treason. He knew his career was over. But some things mattered more than personal consequences. Truth mattered. Justice mattered. And the lives of billions of humans mattered more than his own comfort or status. The galaxy's response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of species withdrew their support for the war within hours of the broadcast. Their representatives issued statements condemning the conspiracy and demanding investigations. Scientific organizations published analyses showing that human civilization was fascinating rather than frightening. Cultural groups began organizing exchanges with human artists and thinkers. Religious leaders from multiple species offered prayers for peace and reconciliation. The tide of opinion shifted so quickly that the 3 conspirators found themselves isolated and facing criminal charges instead of continuing to direct galactic policy. Chancellor Vexter tried to suppress the growing movement by declaring the evidence falsified and ordering Krigzina's arrest. The order was ignored by most military commanders who had served with the general and trusted his integrity more than the Chancellor's denials. Ambassador Quintal attempted to flee to a world outside Council jurisdiction, but was arrested by his own species, who were horrified by his actions. High Administrator Morvex resigned and went into hiding, though investigators were already working to locate him. The Council itself fractured as different species argued about how to proceed. Some wanted to continue the war despite the revelations. Most wanted to open peace negotiations immediately. A few demanded the Council be dissolved entirely and rebuilt from foundations of honesty rather than political convenience. Commander Hyen watched the broadcasts from his eyes. Flagship with emotions he could barely name. Relief that the truth was finally known. Anger at how close humanity had come to extinction based on lies. Grief for everyone who had already died in a war that should never have happened. Hope that maybe peace was actually possible now. He received a communication request from General Krigzina within hours of the broadcast going public. This time the conversation was official and open. The Velkari general offered immediate ceasefire and formal peace negotiations. Hyen accepted without hesitation. The fighting stopped that day after months of violence that had killed hundreds of thousands on both sides. Peace talks took place in neutral space, aboard a station maintained by species not directly involved in the conflict. Commander Hyen led the human delegation with Tactical Officer Minji and several diplomats who had been trying to prevent this war from the beginning. General Krigzina represented the Velkari Empire with Lieutenant Jiwan and a group of officers who had supported his decision to expose the conspiracy. They met in a conference room designed to accommodate multiple species with different environmental needs. The first meeting was awkward, as beings who had been killing each other days ago tried to navigate diplomatic protocol, but something unexpected happened during those talks. The two sides discovered they actually liked each other. Hyen and Krixna shared military backgrounds and understood the burden of command. They swapped stories about battles and leadership challenges. Minji and Jiwan bonded over their shared love of tactical analysis and started collaborating on military theory that combined human aggression with Valkyrie coordination. The diplomats found common ground in their frustration with politicians who started wars that soldiers had to finish. Within a week, the peace talks felt less like negotiations between enemies and more like problem-solving between colleagues trying to fix a situation neither side had wanted. The formal peace agreement took 3 months to finalize. It included provisions for immediate cessation of hostilities, return of prisoners, humanitarian aid to devastated colonies, and establishment of formal diplomatic relations between humanity and the Galactic Council. The Council itself underwent major reforms. The 3 conspirators were tried and convicted of crimes against sapient species. New oversight mechanisms were established to prevent future manipulation of information. Multiple species pushed for humanity to be granted full council membership with voting rights, though that process would take years to complete. For now, humans were recognized as a legitimate civilization with the same rights and protections as any other species. But the most important outcomes of the peace were not political. They were personal and cultural. The galaxy began learning Abu T-Earth and discovering that death worlds were fascinating rather than frightening. Student exchanges started immediately. Young Valkyrie requested permission to visit Earth and experience heavy gravity training. They wanted to see the planet that had produced such formidable beings. Human students traveled to paradise worlds and learned about civilizations that developed in completely different conditions. Artists collaborated across species boundaries, creating works that combined human passion with alien perspectives. Scientists shared research and made discoveries that neither species could have achieved alone. General Krixna visited Earth 6 months after the peace agreement was signed. He traveled with a security detail, but also with genuine curiosity. Walking on the surface under nearly double standard gravity was exhausting, but he insisted on experiencing it properly. Commander Hyen gave him a tour of human cities, museums, and historical sites. They visited memorials for soldiers who had died in the war, both human and Valkyrie. They stood together in silence, honoring sacrifice on both sides. Krixna laid a wreath at the memorial for Captain Doyan, whose sacrifice had defined the first space battle. Hyen did the same at a memorial established for Valkyrie troops who had died at New Bizin, including those killed by Sora's final action. The visit concluded with a ceremony where both commanders addressed a crowd of thousands in person and billions watching through broadcasts. Hyen spoke about the cost of misunderstanding and the importance of seeking truth before resorting to violence. He acknowledged that humans were shaped by their difficult world, but insisted that those origins did not define their entire nature. They could be fierce warriors when necessary, but they preferred to be builders, explorers, and friends. They wanted to contribute to galactic civilization, not threaten it. They hoped the rest of the galaxy would give them that chance. Krixna spoke about his journey from certainty to doubt to understanding. He admitted he had approached the war believing humans were monsters that needed to be eliminated. He learned through painful experience that different was not dangerous, and that paradise was not the only path to wisdom. Earth had taught humanity lessons that paradise worlds could not provide. Lessons about persistence and adaptation, and the strength that came from surviving impossible conditions. The galaxy needed those lessons. not because war was good, but because understanding struggle made peace more valuable. Humans could teach the rest of the galaxy something important. That comfort was not the only environment where greatness grew. That hardship could forge beauty instead of destroying it. Years later, the human war was remembered as a turning point in galactic history. Not because of the battles, though those were studied extensively in military academies. Not because of the conspiracy, though that led to permanent reforms in how the Council operated. It was remembered because it forced the galaxy to confront uncomfortable truths about diversity and acceptance. Paradise worlds had dominated galactic culture for so long that they forgot other environments could produce intelligence. Humanity proved that assumption wrong and opened possibilities nobody had considered. If death worlds could foster civilization, what other assumptions were wrong? What other environments might produce unique and valuable perspectives? Exploration teams began seeking out life on planets previously dismissed as uninhabitable. They found microbial colonies thriving in conditions that should have been impossible. They found simple organisms adapting to extreme environments with elegant solutions to survival challenges. They even found hints of other developing intelligences on worlds that made Earth look gentle by comparison. The galaxy expanded its understanding of where life could exist and how intelligence could develop. Humanity became ambassadors for that expanded understanding, helping other species appreciate that the universe was more diverse and wonderful than anyone had imagined. Commander Haiyan retired from military service and became an ambassador. He spent his remaining years building bridges between humans and other species, teaching the galaxy about Earth, while learning about countless alien worlds. General Krixna did the same on the Velkari side, using his status as a war hero to promote peace and understanding. They remained friends until Haiyan's death at the age of 92. Krixna attended the funeral and spoke about the human who taught him that enemies could become friends if both sides chose. Honesty over fear, the galaxy learned the most important lesson that war could teach, that diversity made civilization stronger rather than threatening it, that being shaped by different conditions brought different strengths to shared challenges, that paradise and struggle both produced wisdom, just different kinds of wisdom, and that the death planet called Earth, which had tried so hard to kill humanity for millions of years, had actually given the galaxy a gift. Survivors who understood the value of cooperation because they had learned it the hard way. Warriors who preferred peace because they knew the true cost of violence. Dreamers who reached for the stars because they refused to let their harsh origins define their limits. The galaxy wanted war and got truth instead. It turned out truth was more valuable